delayed flight. Mayor Chiu.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good. Doing good.
Yeah.
So this is
sit or you want
your choice.
Okay.
Your choice. You have 3 minutes or so to introduce and say whatever you want about the campaign of the arts, and then Q&A.
Sure.
And we're taping for members of the PAC who aren't here.
Okay.
And then the full club endorsement will be next Monday.
Great.
So we're doing a recommendation today.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are doing well after hearing from a plethora of candidates and initiatives. So I'm David Chiu, and I first want to thank all of you for what you're doing to really lead in the artistic community here in San Francisco. Let me first start by saying that for over 10 years, when I was younger, I was a musician. And I actually thought of becoming a professional musician. Wasn't exactly good enough, but that experience has frankly created in me for the rest of my life a lifelong commitment to the arts, and something that I have been involved in through my entire time as a leader here in San Francisco, and particularly over the past 3 years as I've served as the president of your Board of Supervisors. Maybe I'll just talk for 30 seconds about my mayoral campaign, but I also want to talk about what I've been doing for the arts. So I think some of you know, by way of background, I worked in the city as a civil rights attorney, as a prosecutor, as a neighborhood leader, and a founder of a small business. I've been serving as a president of your board for the past 3 years. And I'm really proud of the fact that I think right now City Hall is in a different place. We are getting things done. Talking specifically about the arts, my guess is every mayoral candidate will tell you 1,000% committed to the arts. This is what we're going to do. Let me tell you about my record, because I think it is what sets me apart from other folks who have been coming here in front of you. First and foremost, ever since I came into office, I have been focused on figuring out why it is that arts funding to our local artists, to our diverse artists, have been so low. And in fact, in my first year during the budget process, I asked Luis Cancel, why is it that only about 25% of our local grants went to local artists? I basically told him at that time that if the numbers didn't change, I would be interested in looking at almost the local hiring equivalent for grants to artists. Over the past 3 years today, that number is now in the 60% as far as the percentage of grants that are going to local artists, which I think is the right trend, but it needs to continue. Secondly, I've been very focused on the lack of continued funding for our city-owned cultural centers. We all know that in recent years, compared to other big institutions, those cultural centers have not received their fair share. In fact, this year in the budget process, when I found out that the Queer Center and the API Center had been just cut, I put in the only add back related to the arts in this budget process to make sure that that was not the case, but this is an ongoing conversation we need to have. A third thing that I've done, in part in discussions with Deborah Walker and others, we all know that we have a 1% fee that is required of big developers downtown. I recently introduced legislation to loosen how those monies could be used to allow developers and owners of buildings to spend a portion or all of those fees for local community-based arts programs instead of just a large piece of artwork in the middle of a downtown corporate art lobby. I think that is a far better flexible use of that potential source of funds, and something that I hope to see through the legislative process shortly. Fourth thing I will emphasize is I have always been a big believer of neighborhood-based arts. So in my own district, I have supported a whole number of arts in the storefronts installations, and that is a program that I love and want to see continue. I recently helped to unveil a mural program on Polk Street depicting some of our artistic and historical backgrounds of that Polk Street area. I think as a city, we are not investing in neighborhood-based opportunities for our artists to showcase their work and to be part of an integrated local community. It's something that, as a former neighborhood leader, I'm really focused on, and it's something that, frankly, I want to see happen all over the city, whether it be with the America's Cup on the waterfront, whether it be here in the Tenderloin, with Burning Man and theaters and other arts groups coming here alongside technology companies, Twitter, and innovation. I can talk on and on, but my guess is my 3 minutes are over.
We'll talk more because there's questions.
Deborah.
Regarding the fee on development, you know, we just recently went through a large proposal for Park Merced over on the west side.
Yep.
These kind of projects do not have to pay a mitigation to arts, and yet the need for neighborhood arts out in the west side is just as large and urgent as over in the east side. Would you actually support expanding the mitigation to a citywide fee on large projects for the benefit of funding neighborhood arts out in the areas away from city center?
Yeah, I'm definitely open to that. One large project that I worked on last year was the America's Cup, and I am very supportive of making sure that the 2% construction fee, which should be going to the arts related to that project, that is something that we do along the waterfront, and certainly would be open to making sure that large developments like Park Merced, like the Shipyard project, like others, have a component that go to the arts. It has to be a component of what we do. We can't just build concrete structures and housing and retail and not have something that reflects the art of our city.
So,
Tony.
So when we in the arts fight against other sources of, spending in the city budget, we lose. So we're not really going to get anything back out of what should be coming to us on the hotel tax or neighborhood arts program or anything unless there's new revenues. And at the same time, the taxes that you guys can do locally are all regressive taxes. There's some movement at the state level to maybe have some things like a local income tax or whatever, but that's not here yet. So what kinds of ideas or things are you interested in as far as getting revenue into the budget that aren't necessarily taxes? That's the only way we're actually going to get the support.
Well, as far as new revenues, let me talk about one thing which would be a tax, but I think something that needs to happen, which is we need to reform our business tax. I have been a champion of this ever since I served on the Small Business Commission. At this time, only 1 out of 10 businesses in San Francisco actually pay the business tax. And the tax that we have today is a payroll tax that penalizes the creation of jobs. So I'm very committed to reforming the business tax to make sure that we have a broader base of folks that are helping to support our general funds. I'm also a big proponent of bringing back the vehicle license fee that had been around in San Francisco for 50 years before Governor Schwarzenegger in 2003 took a wrecking ball to our budget and eliminated this fee, which brought $6 billion to state coffers and between $50 to $70 million to local coffers as well. Another revenue idea that I put out has to do with something that was actually in the papers today, which is the existence of about 110 miles of underground fiber related to IT infrastructure. Most of that fiber is unused. We could actually license that as a public system to the private sector, to hospitals, to schools, to private residences, and that is a source of revenue I think we should absolutely consider.
But just to follow up on that, though, the gross receipts tax, which was the alternative to the payroll tax, was destroyed 7 or 8 years ago by the board under pressure of a lawsuit that the Chamber of Commerce and folks were signing on to, making you choose one, and the choice at that time was the payroll tax. So, especially given the power that the Chamber of Commerce seems to have now on the board, how are you going to get a reform that leads to a meaningful tax that actually gets significant income that business actually supports?
So a number of years ago, with the action that you're talking about, we used to have a dual business tax system. You either paid a gross receipts or a payroll tax, whichever was higher. Lawsuit came and basically forced the city to choose, and from my perspective, I think they chose poorly. They chose to continue with a payroll tax that has not been fairly placed on San Franciscans, and I think we need to move forward with the gross receipts tax. I have already been building support all over the city in diverse communities, progressive and business communities, labor and industry, to really move this forward. I think it's a matter of a mayor who's going to bring folks together, really, and hammer out consensus and get this done. In the budget this year, I actually put some money in to do research on exactly what type of a gross receipts tax we're looking for. So it's a matter of political will and political leadership, and that's the type of leadership I want to bring. Others? Yeah.
Public gathering and presentation space is incredibly important to the arts. Coming up this week at the Planning Commission is a hearing over the Concourse Center that's down the southern area of Soma that has served a lot of business needs as well as arts and large-scale festivals. I haven't seen anything that's come up that actually replaces these sort of resources when we lose them. I'm wondering if there's any policies or ideas or if this goes through, what can the community do or can the city do to potentially maintain or actually add to the existing stock of community gathering spaces?
I absolutely believe, I think no one can dispute that community gathering spaces, using open space to pull neighborhoods and communities together, that is at the essence of the vitality of a city. And I think that oftentimes we choose to allow these spaces to be replaced with private roads and cars, and we haven't taken back our streets, we haven't taken back our spaces for large gatherings like what you're talking about. So this is why in recent years I've been a huge proponent of Sunday streets, closing down the streets to create that community, of parklets, taking parts of our streets to turn them into, again, community alongside cafes and restaurants. And I'm very supportive of thinking about how to use large plazas and large opening spaces. We had a wonderful gathering Friday afternoon, which was a celebration of Burning Man coming to UN Plaza, coming to the Tenderloin area. As I think you all know, their organization is moving into this area. And there was a major art installation and music to really celebrate this aspect of who we are as San Franciscans. And this is something that I absolutely support. I think the America's Cup could be used as a great example of that. We ought to have outdoor performances, artistic ventures, and venues that allow for the entire year of 2013 and hopefully a portion of 2012 for us to really take back our streets, take back our civic spaces for these types of gatherings. Yeah.
So speaking of the America's Cup, I mean, how do you go from the idea of doing that to the actual doing of it?
That's a great question, and it's actually one that I asked a number of months ago when we got the America's Cup approvals and all the city officials were looking at each other saying, well, now what? We have an incredible amount of planning that we have to do, transit planning, logistical planning, and frankly, artistical planning. And city government right now, I think, needs to do a better job of getting folks from each of the departments to be working together on the major plan that is going to be required when we become basically the world's largest amphitheater with the America's Cup. And so right now there are conversations that are happening specifically around the arts. We need to make sure that it happens more, that we are engaging all of you in a way that we frankly haven't been, and that we're actually getting details down and implementing this stuff as soon as we can. And we should probably talk afterwards if that's something you want to get involved in.
Yeah, I just have, this is maybe more philosophical, but if you're watching the news right now, it looks like we're heading into potentially a real economic meltdown globally. And what do you think the special challenges for, even listening to them talk, what happens in San Francisco is not the same thing that happens in Detroit or Washington or Tennessee. So what do you think the particular challenges for San Francisco will be if there is a double dip recession, and what special insights and qualities do you have as mayor to lead around that, which doesn't even necessarily mean lead out of it, because I don't know if one mayor can lead out of a double dip recession, but what can you bring to us as our leader to weather the storm?
I think that's possibly one of the most intense and central questions to this mayoral campaign. For me, I think one of the top challenges, I would probably put it at number one, facing the next mayor, is making sure we are building a true 21st century economy here in San Francisco. The qualification I have in that regard is I'm the only elected official running for mayor who has started a business, who has hired folks, and who's had to lay folks off during past recessions. I know how incredibly difficult it is to create jobs here, and I think our city needs to focus on not just tech jobs, not just the Twitters and the green collar and high-tech, biotech, green tech jobs, but we really need to focus on our creative industries, our artists, our writers, our musicians, our marketers, to make sure that they are part of hopefully recharging our local creative economy. If I was mayor, I would make sure that there was an economic development person who is focused on the creative economies, on the artistic economies, to make sure that we are marketing ourselves, that we are supporting those of you who are creating jobs off of being creative, to make sure that our nightlife is thriving in a way that's healthy and safe, and really focusing on aspects of our economy that most mayors really don't focus on. I mean, for all intents and purposes, from what I see, my friends who are artists are part of an economy that's a little bit on the fringes of San Francisco, and they need to be part of what is central to our economy, just as tourism and technology and high finance and real estate are as well.
Last one, thank you.
Sort of a segue to that, the infrastructure of the arts is pretty fragmented, and it gives us little ability to coordinate efforts along those lines. Sometimes the departments themselves don't even know who would need to be at a meeting to discuss policy around arts in America's Cup, so we have to encourage them. What would you do as mayor to change that?
First of all, I think the structure of arts governance in San Francisco city government is broken. I'm one of the folks who does support bringing together the Arts Commission with Grants for the Arts. And we should bring them under one roof with at least one staffer whose job it is to coordinate the arts among all of the other departments, whether it be communicating with our transit agencies, communicating with the Department of Public Works, communicating with the Planning Department. We have so many departments that could have an impact collectively in moving forward an arts vision for the city. And this is something that I lay out in my questionnaire, that I would want to make sure that there was one person that was dedicated to this. The fact of the matter is, and this also ties into the last question, we have a huge government. We have a $6.8 billion, 26,000 employee, 50-plus department corporation known as the City and County of San Francisco. And the fact that we've got 15 departments that regulate the small business community, that's a problem. The fact that we have several departments that are supposed to be impacting the arts but don't work together, don't coordinate, that's a problem. And so for me, part of what I would want to do as a mayor is to streamline, to consolidate, and to make sure that there's very clear direction coming from one voice that's speaking on behalf of the arts, that's not just speaking on behalf of the big six institutions, but that's really looking out for the diversity of our artistic community, looking out for our cultural centers, looking out for making sure that our grants are not going to what Luis Cancel and I always fought about, that our grants ought to go to national artists, international artists, as opposed to our local San Francisco artists. I just happen to have a different perspective on that.
Thank you.
That our time is up.
Thank you for everything you did. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.